Tape Deck Media.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Did you have any shows this last weekend? Were you on the road or anything?
I was not actually this weekend. I'm finishing up school. Actually, I'm back in school, so I had a bunch of final exams, and we were in Puerto Rico for my kids'
Oh,
spring break. So,
nice.
yeah.
Uh,
So I was doing schoolwork in Puerto Rico.
yeah, that doesn't sound that bad at
There's
all.
worse places to do schoolwork. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What if you don't mind, what are you going to school for?
Social work.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. I asked because same kind of I went to school after I started comedy. I have this joke where people they joke about dropping out of college to pursue comedy. I was like, I
Right.
pursued comedy to go to college.
Oh, dude, that's great. Yeah, I have a joke about that too, but mine is about my kids. A lot of people say they drop out of college. They have to tell their parents, "Hey, I'm doing stand up, so I'm not going to college." But I started comedy after I had a family, so I had to tell my kids, "Hey, Dad's doing stand up, so you're not going to college."
That's great. That's great. That's
But yeah,
fantastic.
it's been an
Yeah.
interesting journey trying to balance school and comedy. So yeah, I'm still figuring it out. This is my first semester, so
Oh, well, I wish you all the luck with that because as
appreciate it.
somebody who did it can be tough to balance everything, but
Yeah,
yeah, but it'll be worth it in the long run. So,
I think so. I hope so.
yeah, that's great. Well, Uh, before we get into the bombing, I like to get to know the comics a little bit. So, Jeremy, why don't you? I'm curious. I always find it intriguing what prompts somebody to start comedy, and just based on what we've talked about already, you started after you had a family. So, what kind of inspired you to pursue comedy, and where did you start?
Yeah, well, I live in North Carolina now. I grew up in Texas and went to college there, but I didn't start comedy until I had moved here and near the Raleigh, Durham area.
Oh, okay.
I don't live in Raleigh, but I consider it my kind of comedy home base, um, and because that's where most of the comedy happens in this area. Um, and I started because, well, kind of a sad story, as I got divorced and I needed, I guess, something to do with with my time, and I was looking to kind of make new friends and stuff. And comedy, I'd been a fan for a while, and kind of during the divorce, I had really kind of leaned into comedy as just kind of bring some relief and some levity to a hard time, like a lot of people do.
hmm I was gonna say we're very similar. That's exactly how I started comedy. It's same.
Interesting.
It was a divorce that triggered me to pursue stand up.
Yeah, well, I've heard that
But
a few times now since from a few people since I've started, for better or worse. It's a very divorced guy activity.
not wrong.
I've come to learn. But I was a preacher in a past life, and and I had stopped preaching, and comedy was kind of a natural fit as a creative outlet. And but when I started, I didn't know how you became a comedian. I didn't know there was like a local amateur comedy scene. Um, I don't know how I thought you became a comedian. Um, but I think I just Googled, you know, comedy in my area and found some local shows and started going, and then found out that there were open mics where you could just go do it.
Yep.
And so I got up the courage to do one, and fell in love with it, and just kind of kept doing it, and just started meeting a lot of really cool and interesting people. Kind of felt like I found my people in a way
Yep.
too, with comedians who weren't all divorced dads, but
Yeah, there
um,
are some that are
th-
married with families and happy, and
sure, right, exactly.
it's
And
not all sad.
no, no, uh, though most comedians are sad, but
Yeah.
it was it was great. And so yeah, I just kind of got hooked on doing comedy, and just kind of the community around it,
Yeah.
and just didn't stop, you know?
That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great beginnings. And in North Carolina, I've been out there once, I think. I went out for the North Carolina Comedy Festival, and then I have some friends that live in Charlotte, and I actually considered moving out there. I was like, this is a really nice area. I really like it.
It's a lovely state, and the comedy scenes here, I feel like, are really strong. They kind of fly under the radar, but we've had some really, I mean, we've got some really great clubs in Raleigh. We have two big clubs, Good Nights Comedy Club, which is a legendary club going back
Hmm.
to the early 70s, and then the Improv opened, a big 550 seat club in Raleigh. So like two big clubs and just great comedy fans. And you can say something similar for Charlotte and Wilmington and Greensboro, just a lot happening here. So
It
it is a
seems
good
like
place to start for
Yeah,
sure.
and it seems like the Southeast has a good like comedy circuit too. Not just, I mean, you have your big hubs, but
Absolutely.
like there's a lot of like clubs and shows, independent shows that are in, driving distance.
Yeah,
As
for
opposed to
sure.
like I'm in Colorado. I claim Denver, but I'm up closer to Fort Collins, but I live in Loveland, and from where we're at, there's nowhere you can go like major for driving that isn't at least a 8 to 10 hour drive,
Yeah,
like there's no other
right.
major markets or,
Sure.
we have a lot of little
Sure.
shows throughout the state or whatever, but there's a lot of driving involved.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a big change for me, like coming from Texas to North Carolina, just being on the East Coast. You can drive to another state in a couple of hours, which just was mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
Just I guess, Texas skews your whole understanding, I think, of geography. And so it does feel like it's a good place to do comedy as a hub, because yeah, I can get to Atlanta in a few hours. I can get to DC in a few hours. Nashville's not far. It's all a day's drive away. So yeah, I'm very lucky in that sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, like I said, I liked it when I was out there. Ended up not moving. My friend ended up moving to Spain, so
Oh,
he's.
well,
I still have another friend that lives in Charlotte, but yeah, I ended up staying here because it's a good area too. But well, let's get into this. Well, before we get into the bombing story, you mentioned that you were a preacher before, and interested to like because obviously it's a different you're performing in a way because you are doing public speaking, but
yeah.
the writing obviously is different. Did you feel like that, having that experience helped propel you so you could, maybe move up the ranks a little bit faster, just because you had some experience with that?
Yeah, I think it did help. I think I was more comfortable being in front of people on a stage and talking,
Hmm. Yep.
and that's such a big part of getting good at comedy, is just being comfortable on
Absolutely.
stage. So I do think it gave me a little bit of a leg up in that sense. And then, the writing part of it too. I mean, when I was a preacher, I tended to, um, do a lot of jokes. I was fairly, provocative in the things that I was saying. And so I was knew how to write to get a reaction, I think. And I think that helped too with
Hmm.
the comedy. Um, And yeah, I mean it's a lot less pressure, obviously.
Yeah.
The crowds are a lot nicer actually in comedy, in a lot of ways. Yeah, I feel like it definitely helped. Like I said, it was kind of a natural transition for me.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that it seems like a lot of people who come from different performing art backgrounds, or even not even performing arts, but even like teachers, you see a lot of teachers that end up in comedy and other forms of public speaking. And you can see that they kind of move a lot quicker than somebody who has zero experience just starting, because
Yeah,
you have some of those
absolutely.
skills already in your tool belt.
Right. I
Yeah.
do wonder if it ever goes the other way. I have yet to meet a pastor or a preacher that was primarily a stand-up in a previous life. I don't know if you know anybody, but I do think that would be, uh,
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that did stand up
yeah,
and then went to
it
preaching.
tends to go in one direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, closer, the downward spiral to hell. So,
And they say, yeah, I know comedians that have, done, were a comedian and then went into some other form of public speaking, like
yeah,
keynote speaking and stuff like
sure,
that, but not
sure.
not so much into the preaching part.
Right,
Uh,
right. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
speaking of the bad stuff, let's talk about bombing. Obviously, the tradition here is that the guest tells a story about a time where they bombed or the show didn't go as they planned. So I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, well, I think the worst time I ever bombed was I think it was the first paid gig that I got, or at least the first one where the money was significant, for me at the time. I
Yep.
was a few years into comedy, and it was a New Year's Eve show, and it was at a very, very fancy hotel in Virginia, and they paid me some money and they gave me a hotel room. And so my wife and I decided to just make a weekend of it and take advantage of the nice hotel. And I trusted the guy that booked me. He was a band leader, and his band was playing at this New Year's Eve party. And they're like a big band, with the brass and all
hmm
of that. And he had seen me at a show and was like, I think I want to incorporate comedy into what we do. And I think you'd be perfect for it. And so I just trusted that he knew what he was doing. But he did not. And first of all, New Year's Eve shows, I've since learned, are often not great
Yeah, they
for
pay
comedy.
often pay well, but often not great.
Right. I didn't know this. I thought, oh, New Year's Eve, that people will be in a good mood, it'll be festive, it'll be, late night, it'll be a good time. People will be drinking. Uh, this New Year's Eve thing, which apparently it's like this big annual thing that this really nice hotel does. It's first of all, it's a family affair. I did not realize this. So there's people of all ages. There's children, there's very,
Oh
very old
no.
people, and they've been coming. A lot of them have been coming to this event for a long time, every year. It's kind of a thing, and they've never had comedy before, and everyone's dressed to the nines. Like I went out and bought a suit for this show, um, and the night was great before the comedy. Well, the way they decided to do it was we all had a meal, we all had drinks. Then the big band got up, the big brass band, and they just tore the place down. People were dancing, they had a dance floor, everybody was dancing, having a great time. Then 15 minutes before midnight, they wanted to have comedy last, leading up to me doing the countdown. And so it's 11:45. Uh, the stage is there's too many instruments on the stage, so they can't put me on the stage. So they put me in the middle of the dance floor with a microphone. there's no spotlights on the dance floor, so they have to raise the lights in the room,
Oh
which,
God.
right.
Yeah, that that's a vibe killer for sure.
Absolutely kills whatever great vibe was happening. Kills. And when the lights go up, I'm also able to see very clearly all of the children in attendance who are very excited about a stand-up comedian. I am not a children's comedian. Uh, and I was not experienced enough to really make adjustments to my set. I was being paid to do 15 minutes and I had 15 minutes. And my 15 minutes was not super kid friendly. I had some very dark material. And so I was like, well, I mean, this is what we're doing. So I think I got into my third joke. I'm maybe halfway through my set, and it is to total silence. It is to total silence, except for the server staff in the back of the room. They are loving it. And I don't know if they're laughing because they like my jokes or like they just love watching
Somebody
somebody
suffer.
else suffer. So I
Could
can
be a
hear them
combination of
laughing. And
both.
that's what's keeping me going. And I do a bit about I mean, at the end it's about God being, whether God's a mommy or a daddy, and I at the end of it is that mom, God is obviously a mommy, because during Noah's time, after she made all the children in the world, she drowned them all. And uh not it's not the place for a joke like that. And
I know I'm laughing because the premise is funny, but also thinking about the
oh,
situation
no,
when you're telling it.
it was terrible. I can't believe I made these nice folks go through this. But again, I had nothing else, and I had to do the time. So I was
Yeah.
gonna do, and I did that joke and to total silence, except for this one old lady. Just I do that joke, and she just goes, "Oh yeah, that's funny." And everybody hears her because no one's laughing. And and I don't know how to. I've never been heckled like by an old lady to total silence, and so I just take a deep breath, man, and I power through, and I get to the end, and I do the countdown, and then I just make a beeline for the hotel bar, man. I just grab my wife, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm paid. I did my time, and that was it. And I still think about those poor people to this day. I do know they never had comedy again at that
That I mean that
show.
checks out.
Yep. I followed up with the guy that booked me, and he was like, yeah, we tried it, and I don't think that's what we're gonna do. So uh
You see that a lot in the corporate world of, with like corporate comedy, like holiday parties and things or whatever. They'll like hire a comedian, it goes horrible, and then they don't do
they
comedy
don't do it
again.
again. And I don't know
Live and
what
learn.
that's right. I don't know what people are expecting. I know it sounds you assume that adding a comedian to an event. I can understand how people think. We add a comedian to a birthday party or a New Year's Eve party or a wedding reception. It's gonna make it funner, right? But so much about comedy is the context.
Yep.
And if you don't have that context, it's probably going to have the opposite effect. It's not going to make it funner. It's going to make it more awkward and painful for everybody, So,
Yeah, I remember one of the funniest gig requests I got was from like one of the, I think it was Gig Salad, and it was right after I went through this really bad breakup, and it was a request for a comedian for a wedding. And all I can think to myself
uh,
is, right now, I am not the comic you want for this.
no,
I'm so bitter about relationships and marriage right
sure,
now.
yes. Right.
I'll be a downer for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. No one should have a comedian at their wedding. Any comedian, but certainly not the
Yeah.
guy going through the breakup. That's
Yeah,
uh
I definitely knew I was aware enough to know that I wasn't. I politely declined the offer.
yeah, good. I mean, any event where people aren't expecting a comedian or they didn't come for comedy, probably not gonna go great.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know, you
absolutely. I
can't
find
spring comedy on people.
no.
They got to be warned.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing you definitely find in like the corporate, in the holiday party stuff like that where they try to surprise everybody with the entertainment.
Right.
So they
Right.
don't tell that they have a comedian. They're just
Yeah.
like, "We've got entertainment. It's a mystery." And then and then they're like, "Oh, now we have to listen to this guy talk for an hour."
Yeah,
Oh.
exactly.
I just want to eat
Exactly.
this dinner and win my prizes.
100%. And like, if you're gonna have something like a New Year's Eve party where there's gonna be dancing and a band, you have to
Hmm.
have the comedian go first.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because no one, it's really hard to follow in a band, and especially if there's dancing, because people are just like they're feeling the vibe. And then to make everybody sit down and be quiet so this guy could talk, this guy we don't even know could
Yep.
just talk to you about his thoughts and feelings about relationships and God and politics or whatever. Like, no, I would hate, I know I would hate that.
Oh,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. That's
yeah,
yeah. That's another thing that I find funny when people try to put shows together and they think it would be great to have music and comedy. And then I'm like, it could work, but you gotta have that format down. And the format is all comedy goes before all music. Don't try to mix it.
absolutely. 100%. Yep.
I've never seen a comedian follow a band and do well. Like I've seen them not necessarily bomb, but not do as well as they could for sure.
Yeah,
If they would have
absolutely.
went before the band, would have been just fine.
Yeah. And same goes if you have like a guitar comic on your lineup, you got to have
Yep.
them go last.
Yep.
You
Oh,
got to.
absolutely.
It's just it's unfair to have somebody try and follow a guitar comic with just a microphone. It's just yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Because they're definitely changing the energy for sure.
100%. Yeah. It
Yeah.
makes I mean it usually makes things better and brings the energy up. So,
Yeah. But yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but it's hard definitely hard to follow if you don't have the same kind of energy.
Exactly.
Unless you're a comic that is like all over the stage and just, got that kind of energy that can follow, just kind of ride that way. But most comics would just stand in one spot.
Right. And that was me. Like I think, that New Year's Eve show, I think Maniscalco could have probably killed after a big band at a New Year's Eve show like
Yep.
that. But deadpan dark religious humor from a comic who's 4 years in, that's just not gonna work. It's not
Yeah.
gonna work, so
Did
yeah,
you,
but
after thinking back on that experience, obviously one of the things you already kind of pointed out was that you only had the time that you had, so that you couldn't deviate away when you found out, you know, that it
yeah.
was family friendly type of situation. What were some of the other takeaways you kind of took from that and then applied to, future bookings?
Well, I think, having a stage is important. Like
Absolutely.
especially if you've already had entertainment on a stage, to then put the comedian down on the floor as the same level as everybody else. That's a tough spot to
Well,
be
and
in.
that also changes like the psychology of it. It's a
It
weird because
does.
comedy does have a weird psychology like that, where you know the fact like that's a good point. You have all the other entertainment on the stage, and then suddenly the comedian's on the floor, and it's like say, well, the comedian's not as good as the rest of the entertainment, and it
Yeah.
puts like a
Yeah.
subconscious thing into people's
Yeah.
brains. It's like,
I
oh,
think it does. And I think it also kind of equalizes things. Like, I don't think that old lady who heckled me, well, I think part of why she did it is like I was looking her right in the eye. She was at a table, like right at eye level right in front of me, and it's like we're having a conversation.
Yep.
Whereas if I'm on a stage and there's a little bit of distance, I think she probably doesn't say anything, but it does. It just changes the psychology of the whole thing. And I think for me, what I learned was when I was booking a gig, I got a lot more information about the show, what the setup was going to be, what the lineup, where I was going to go in the lineup, what kind of audience was going to be there. Am I a good fit? I just did a lot better job after that
I
vetting
wondered if that was going to be one of the takeaways was to
for
ask more
sure.
questions, get more
For sure.
information. Because yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing how much that can help with the booking, even if you know it's not necessarily the right situation for a comedian. You can make it work if you ask enough questions, because then you can give them the
Yeah.
information to make it work. You're supposed to be the expert on that. Are we as
100%.
comedians? Yeah,
What 100%. And people appreciate that.
yeah.
People who are booking because if they've never done comedy before, they don't know what you need or what makes for a good show. So yeah, so that was definitely a big takeaway. And realizing that sometimes no matter how good the money is, it's not always worth the show.
Yeah, that's a hard
And
lesson too.
it is a hard lesson. It is.
When you're a up and coming comedian and we're working for chicken fingers and beer tickets.
Absolutely. And you're trained, or at least I was trained early on, as you say yes to everything,
Yep.
which there's some truth to that. I think it is important to put yourself in a lot of different situations because you do learn things that way. But uh, yeah, there's certain gigs where I think it's okay to say no,
Hmm.
to preserve your own kind of well-being. And you know you do enough of those shows and you just will hate comedy, and
Absolutely.
you don't want to get into that space. That's not going to help you. So
Yeah, that's not, yeah, definitely. It's not going to help you in any aspects of your career, because then
no.
even when you go to like where you should be having fun, you're not going to have fun anymore
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that bitterness is
Yeah,
all over you.
I'm
Yeah.
also more aware of like holiday themed shows, and more maybe less inclined. um
Hmm.
it just depends. I mean, some of them can be good, like a New Year's Eve show at a club, at a comedy club where people come for comedy. Those can actually be pretty fun. But if it's a holiday themed event, I don't know. It's just those are tough, So I'm
Yeah.
just more skeptical of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And rightfully so. I'm the same way. Even when I like, except if I, get requests for holiday parties and stuff, I'm always on the fence about it. And I ask
Yeah.
a bunch of questions about it just because you're right. You just never know how those are going to go. At a club, even sometimes at a club, they get to where they're not great because the
Sure.
people, even though the people came for comedy, they also came to, get that
Drink,
unlimited
get
drink. Yeah,
rowdy.
that
Yeah.
open drink bar that they paid for.
Yeah. 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 I will say another thing
But
that I learned from it that's been really good for my career is that I did start writing more broadly appealing, cleaner comedy so
hmm
that I was prepared when I was in situations like that. And I found that I tend to write clean anyway because that's just kind of how I think. I don't think, and when I say clean, I just don't cuss a lot
yeah,
in my
I
day to day. So, but I also
I'm the
learned that
opposite.
clean. Oh,
I cuss all the time unless you put a
yeah.
microphone in front of me.
Well, there you go. So you learned.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I had
Yeah.
really good I came up in San Diego, and there's a well, it's Comedy Heights now, but they produced a lot of shows at like coffee shops and things like that. And
Yeah.
they were really good at mentoring comics, and so they encouraged to, be clean and clever. And
Good.
so yeah,
That's
so I had
great
some really good
advice.
mentoring.
Yeah, that's huge. But I've learned that like clean, it's not just about, not dropping F-bombs. It's also just not, it's not just about not talking about sex.
Hmm.
Um, there's themes that like I talk, and I still do. I talk a lot about religion because it's just in my background. And
Yep.
um, there are certain audiences that just they don't want to hear anybody joking about religion at all, especially if the jokes are in any way, challenging.
Hmm.
And so, I learned that there's just certain themes that even if you're writing technically clean, just not a great idea to bring it up in certain places.
So I had a follow up on that because I've been playing around doing stuff on religion, a little bit of religion, because I grew up pretty religious. I grew up Southern Baptist, and my grandma's super, super religious, and I've been, playing around, and I see exactly what you're saying with that. Some audience just don't want to hear any of it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. That as soon as you start talking about religion, they're out.
Yeah.
So when you're doing your material and say you decide that you're going to try, do you have like a couple jokes that you kind of use to test the audience to see how they react? And if they react one way where they start tightening up, you're like, maybe I better not do these, go
Yeah.
into this full.
I do at this point because I have kind of religious themed material that is it's very fun and light and goofy.
Hmm.
And once I know, like, okay, they can kind of they're willing to laugh at themselves about certain goofy things about church or whatever, then I feel a little bit better about challenging them a little bit with maybe something that's a little darker or a little more provocative or challenging or whatever. Um, but even that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, yeah,
Some people are
absolutely.
fine. Some people are
Yep.
fine if it's light and fun and goofy, but if you have anything that's, more than that on religion, they're just going to shut down. And it's the same with politics
Yep.
too. They're very similar. I feel
Yep.
like it's just a
I find that
minefield. It's a minefield.
politics and religion are the two that if done well, they can be great,
Yeah.
but there's a line that really has to be towed, and you have to be very masterful on how you're presenting it. But
Yes.
because otherwise, they're good topics to divide an audience for sure.
Yeah. Which means you're probably not gonna do well with that material your first 5 years.
Hmm. Absolutely.
It's definitely once you get a little more experienced, a little bit better at writing, and you kind of know what works and what doesn't, um, it's easier to craft jokes on those topics that
Yep.
you can have a higher confidence in.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I where I'm at with writing and everything, I have like the confidence is there, but I just notice like what you're saying, how sometimes the audience really tightens up and wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes, it's fine. And I don't do anything like I don't go hard into like where I'm like preachy one way or another. I just
Hmm.
talk about being raised Baptist and some other things
Yeah.
from my upbringing and things
Yeah.
like that. And
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty funny joke, and even it usually gets a really good laugh. And because I have a joke about God being always being there for you and always watching. And in the joke, I'm like. I talk about my grandma saying I need to find God, and there's a little bit of lead up to it, and I'm like, and then she'll say, "Oh, he's your friend. He's always there. He's always watching." And I'm like, "That sounds like a friend that needs boundaries." Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
But
That's
yeah, so
great.
it's just little stuff like that or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I have found that as soon as you start, even you don't even have to do a joke. You just mention, say something about being raised religious, and people like,
Sure. There's just certain words that
yep.
that put people on the defensive. So you just need to be ready to pivot,
Hmm.
have something another topic ready to go, when
Yeah.
it's not working. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and I agree with what you're saying there too. Like if you're a newer comic, wait until you're 5, 6 years in to really, play with these subjects because you got to get good at comedy. Because also you want to have material to deviate.
To pivot
That's
to,
to pivot
yeah.
to. Yep.
Yeah. And if people, it also helps if people kind of know you a little bit and trust you.
Yes.
That's the other thing. Like, you definitely don't want to open on your like heavy religious material.
Yep.
Um, you know, Save it for later once you've kind of built some trust and shown that you're funny and that they don't have to be worried. That took me a while to learn, for sure. and yeah, and I can imagine, once you have kind of an audience that comes to see you, you can just get away with a lot more because they
Yep.
want to hear your thoughts on these kinds of topics. So maybe it's just, stuff that you hold on to, you know.
Yeah, and play with it down the road for sure.
Yeah,
Well, this has been
right.
great. We're gonna wrap up. You have an
Okay.
album out. Let's talk about that a little bit before we go. Tell us a little bit about that project and where people can find it.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. It's my first album. It's called Almost a Grown Man, and you can. I worked with a great little comedy record label called Blonde Medicine, which I love, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff about growing up religious and homeschooled, and there's a lot of fun stuff about that. Um, it will be out April 25th is the release date. You can get it wherever music and comedy is sold. You can stream it on Apple or Spotify or Bandcamp or all of those things. So
Absolutely. Or you
yeah,
can go over to Blonde Medicine and buy it.
that would
Really,
be
really
the best thing you
support.
could do. Thanks, thank you, Dan. You're clearly better at this than I am. No, check out Blonde Medicine. They've got a ton of great
They do.
comedians on
Yeah.
there, and a lot of them that I feel should be much better known than they are. So,
Yeah, they do
so
a
check them out.
really good job of curating their talent
They
versus
do.
putting out quantity for
Yep.
sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Is this just an album or is there video? Is it going to be released as a special as well? Because I know that's
We're
kind of a trend now these days.
right. I'm not going to release it as a special, but I am putting clips out.
Putting out clips.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Got to
Yep.
put out the clips to promote it at least.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So
And then
yeah, check that
last,
out.
cool. Yeah, we'll definitely check that out. And lastly, where can people keep up with you? Do you have a website?
Yeah. Check out jeremyalder.com. That'll let you know where I'm going to be. I'm traveling a bit this summer. And so I might be in your town. I'm also on Instagram at jeremy.alder, and then TikTok, Facebook, all at Jeremy Alder. So you can find me
Perfect.
on all the platforms.
And we'll put links in the show notes. Thanks for joining me today, Jeremy.
Thank you, Dan. I had a lot of fun. I really like this podcast. Glad to be on it.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.